Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Alexandra Hall. I'm a family doctor who has some special expertise in sexual and reproductive health, as well as a biology lecturer at the university level. And I'm here to talk with you today about the amazing story of how we end up with the bodies that we do according to classical gender lines. So how does someone who is female-bodied end up female-bodied? How does someone who is male-bodied end up male-bodied? So here we go. I have 4 volunteers here with me today, and I'm going to take you through what happens based on our chromosomes or our genetics. So we're going to start first with an individual who has XY chromosome. So XY, as you may know, is the typical chromosomal sex for someone who will end up male-bodied. So let's take a look at how that happens. So what's important to realize is that the beginning state for all of us when we're little tiny embryos in the womb is that we are what is called indifferent, meaning that until about 7 weeks of development after fertilization, if you look physically, there is actually no difference between an embryo that's going to develop into a female-bodied baby or a male-bodied baby. So let's take a look at those starting parts. Externally, in terms of the external genitalia, we all start out with what kind of looks like a mini penis. And it's biology, so we give different names for these things. This is the genital tubercle. These are the labio or the genital folds, and this is the labioscrotal swelling. So we all start off with external genitalia that looks like this, looks sort of masculine. And internally, we all start off with 2 gonads. Now those gonads are often going to either turn into testes or ovaries, but they start as an in-between, could be either gonads. And we all start off with 2 sets of tubes, Mullerian ducts, which I've shown in pink, and Wolffian ducts, which I've shown in blue. So we kind of start off with a double set of tubes internally, and we all start off with the exact same thing externally. So let's look at what happens now to a typical XY male. So the Y chromosome is going to be our important factor here. The Y chromosome is the smallest human chromosome. It's not very big, it doesn't have very many genes on it, but it has some that are really important for reproductive development. So primary among those is a gene called the SRY gene, which stands for sex determining region of the Y chromosome. We also have some genes for how to make sperm, as well as some genes that will tend to make you be a little bit taller, have slightly bigger hands, feet, and teeth. So all of those things are on the Y chromosome, and that's about it. Nothing that's present on the Y chromosome is essential for human life. After all, about half of humans don't have one. So there's just a few things on here. So it's a small chromosome, but it can be pretty powerful. So let's look back at that SRY gene and see what happens. So around 7 weeks of development, that SRY gene is going to activate, and it kind of sends out a call to the gonads, and it says, all right, gonads, I need you to become testes. So that SRY gene at 7 weeks of development tells the gonads to become testes. And so I'm going to switch those in for blue. Now the testes are going to do 2 things in the developing embryo. They're going to make 2 hormones. The first hormone that I'm going to talk about is one you probably haven't heard of before. It's called MIS, which stands for Mullerian inhibiting substance. Now, inhibiting means to stop, right? And I just told you that these pink guys are the Mullerian ducts. So as the testes squirt Mullerian inhibiting substance into the bloodstream, that MIS will cause these Mullerian ducts to shrivel up and go away. The other hormone that the testes are going to produce is, you got it, testosterone. So testosterone is really important for the development of the fetus because without testosterone, those Wolffian ducts won't develop. But with testosterone, those Wolffian ducts are going to develop and turn into the vas deferens, the tube that sperm use to travel from the testes up out of the scrotum and into the pelvis. So the Wolffian ducts turn into the vas deferens, and towards the later part of pregnancy, under the influence of testosterone, the testes are going to move down into the scrotum. So we need a scrotum. So what happens with the external genitalia? Well, in terms of external genitalia, the only factor that's truly important is if testosterone is being produced and can be seen by the body. This individual has testes, they are making testosterone. So testosterone on the external genitalia causes the genital tubercle to become part of the shaft of the penis, the genital folds to become another part of the shaft of the penis, and the labioscrotal swelling to become the scrotum. This is not to scale. But, so here we go. So now we have our typical male external genitalia. So that's our typical biologic male development. Let's take a look at what happens with someone who has typical XX chromosomes. So my next volunteer, XX. So here we are again. We have undifferentiated gonads, we have Mullerian ducts, we have Wolffian ducts, and we have undifferentiated external genitalia. So this is our starting position. So 7 weeks of development comes along, and that's the time when the SRY gene present on the Y chromosome normally activates. This individual doesn't have a Y chromosome, and they don't have an SRY gene. So the gonads kind of wait around. They say, oh, do I hear the call? Is anybody telling me to become testes? No, no. And so finally, around 10 to 14 weeks of development, the gonads say, okay, unless you tell me to do otherwise, I'm gonna turn into ovaries. So later in development then, the gonads become ovaries. So these ovaries are sitting in a fetus or an embryo that is inside a pregnant woman. There's a lot of estrogen around. So they're not going to actually make much in the way of hormones. The ovaries in a fetus are going to be busy making egg cells to get ready. So we are not going to have a lot of hormone production from these ovaries. So let's take a look at what's going to happen. No testosterone is being produced because we don't have testes. In the absence of testosterone, what will happen is that those Wolffian ducts shrivel up and die. So they go away. In the absence of MIS, Mullerian inhibiting substance, in the absence of that other hormone that was made by testes, the Mullerian ducts won't shrivel up and go away. Instead, they'll persist and develop. And they do this really interesting thing where the bottom parts are going to fuse together and the upper parts are going to stay out to the side. So you can see how this forms the uterus, the fallopian tubes, and the upper part of the vagina. So I'm just going to relocate my ovaries. So in the absence of a signal to do otherwise, the gonads become ovaries, and the Mullerian ducts persist and develop into the internal female reproductive structures, and the Wolffian ducts disintegrate and go away. So that's our typical internal female development. Let's take a look at what happens externally. So we start with our undifferentiated genitals, and testosterone is now absent because we don't have testes making it. And what happens is in the absence of testosterone, that genital tubercle is going to become the clitoris, the genital folds will become the labia minora, and the labioscrotal swelling will become the labia majora. So in the absence of testosterone, the external genitalia becomes, quote, feminized and forms a vulva. And so that's our typical classic definition of female development. So that's all well and good, and that fits with what you probably learned in school, in biology, or a health class. But let's take a look at some other ways that human beings can develop. Because the really exciting and interesting thing is that Mother Nature just doesn't have these two options. In fact, people come in all different shapes and sizes, and that's the same thing when we're talking about reproductive anatomy. So there are all different types of interesting combinations that can occur, and I'm going to show you two examples. So the first example is going to be someone who has XX chromosomes, but the SRY gene happens to be present. They don't have a Y chromosome, so they don't have the rest of those structures, or those genes, but they do because of a little hitch in the get along during cellular replication. They do have an SRY gene present in their chromosomes. So let's take a look at what happens. Okay, so here we are, undifferentiated internally, undifferentiated externally, and at 7 weeks of development, that SRY gene is present. So it's going to send out the call, just as it did for this individual, and those gonads are going to become testes, because it's all about the SRY gene. Now, the testes, just like the other testes, are going to make two hormones. They're going to make MIS, which causes the Müllerian ducts to disintegrate. Whoops, not the testes, just the Müllerian ducts to disintegrate. And they're going to produce testosterone, which will cause the Wolffian ducts to persist and turn into the internal ductal system of the male. So the vas deferens and some other associated structures that we're not going to get into today. Okay. And with the presence of testosterone, our external genitalia is going to turn into a penis and scrotum. So now we have an individual who has XX chromosomes, but because that one gene also happened to be present, they develop no differently physically from this person, right? And their hormones are exactly the same as this person, who's your typical XY. So now we have to say to ourselves, okay, well, what would be different in these two folks? And so we have to remember what's on the Y chromosome. So the SRY gene they have, because that one got put on a different area of their chromosomes, but they probably don't have genes for how to make sperm. So in this individual, who when they are born, based on their external anatomy, will be assigned sex male at birth, and who will develop and go through puberty just like a typical XY male. The only time we would know that there's anything different about this person compared to a typical XY male-bodied person is if they try to have children, because they usually don't have those genes for how to make sperm, so they're usually infertile. And so if they are unable to father a child and then they go and get testing done and are found to not produce sperm, then some additional testing might reveal to them that they have this particular condition. So they actually have two X chromosomes. How common is this condition? The answer is we don't know, because a lot of cases of this particular arrangement go undiagnosed, because a lot of people maybe never try to have children or never pursue further diagnostic or medical evaluation for male factor infertility. So it's at least 1 in 20,000, probably a lot more than that. I've already met a couple people who have it. All right, so our last example of a difference in development is going to be someone who has XY chromosomes, but this person is going to be missing a testosterone receptor. So what I haven't talked about yet is how, in order for our cells, our bodies, our tissues to respond to hormones, we have to have receptors on the cells that allow those hormones to come in and give their message. So this individual is XY, but they don't have a receptor for and are therefore unable to see testosterone. So I'm going to give them these glasses here. Okay. So let's take a look at what happens. They're XY, so they have the SRY gene. So at about 7 weeks after fertilization, after sperm meets egg, that SRY is going to send out the call, send out the signal, and the gonads are going to turn into testes. Right? That's what the SRY gene does. Those testes then are going to make two hormones. First, they're going to make MIS, which is going to cause the Müllerian ducts to shrivel up and go away. Next, they are going to produce testosterone. Whoops, I lost a testicle. They're going to produce testosterone, but the tissues in the body cannot see it. So as far as the body is concerned, although testosterone is truly there, the body can't see it. So what's going to happen then is the Wolffian ducts are also going to shrivel up and go away. So we're going to have no internal ductal system in this particular individual. Now, what about the external genitalia? So remember, the deciding factor for the external genitalia is testosterone. Now in this person, testosterone is definitely present, but it can't be seen. The message can't be received. So in this individual then, the external genitalia is going to develop into a vulva, right? So we're going to get the female pattern of development. So when this individual is born, people will take a look at the external genitalia and assign female as their biologic sex. And in fact, this person, these folks usually do identify as girls and as women, and that feels right for them. And so we have to think, well, how would they ever know that they actually were any different from this person? And of course, the way they would know is because internally they are very different. So whereas in your typical XX individual, female-bodied individual, they are, when they enter puberty, they are going to end up having a menstrual period. This person here will enter puberty, and now you might say, well, they're going to make a whole bunch of testosterone because they have testes, which is true. So you can say, well, isn't their voice going to lower, or aren't they going to develop facial hair? No, because their body can't see testosterone. And then there's this super weird thing that happens, that our bodies have an enzyme called aromatase. If we have a lot of extra testosterone around, we turn it into estrogen. So interestingly, folks with this genetic situation end up having breast development and some of the other female pubertal development that we would expect from someone with a vulva, for someone with a female external genitalia. So the only way this person is going to realize that something is different about them is because they don't get their period, and they don't get their period, and they don't get their period. And so eventually they may go to the doctor to get it figured out why, and then if they do some testing, like an ultrasound to look at the uterus, they will find there is no uterus present inside. So we have tons of different varieties of genetic combinations, hormonal combinations, and anatomic structures that can result from all different types of conditions. So I've given you two examples of different types of development than the stereotypical or traditional development. And so these types of conditions are often referred to as intersex conditions, or sometimes disorders or differences of sexual development, or DSDs. These are actually quite common, depending on how you define them. They impact anywhere from 0.2 to 2% of the population. So they're about as common as redheaded people. So these are actually fairly common. Many go undiagnosed. And many of them, although they may be diagnosed, are often kept very private. So what I wanted to show you today is that although sometimes you will hear people say, well, gender is its basic biology. You're either a boy or a girl, right? You're either a man or a woman. And in a very simplistic way of thinking, that is the case for most people. But we actually have a good number of people in the population that have these combinations of different types of characteristics of the different genders. And so we have lots of folks who are intersex or have these DSDs that exist. So in reality, even when we're talking about biology, it's not binary. It's not one or the other. There are actually a lot of people who are kind of in the in-between areas. And so even biologic sex, your body characteristics, chromosomes, hormones, is on a spectrum. right? It's not just one or the other. So it's really important for us to remember and to think about when we think about differences in sex and gender. I hope that was informational for you. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.